Climb flight level 210 directed.
I'm level 210 directed at Sam out, traffic 1000.
Made. Among them, better training, better equipment. One of the mothers says that she can't believe the Russian people are okay.
I cannot look indifferently at what is happening. There are a lot of outrageous things happening in most countries. I am struck by the indifference of both women and, in general, the entire people to what is happening.
While the Kremlin has, of course, cracked down on dissent, since the young men say this one is different because the word mothers...
Diary 2456, flight level 380, minus 178.
Actually met with mothers of soldiers.
Good morning, please speed and proceed to Aberdeen.
Please speed through Aberdeen 2456.
Lost Russian lives in this war. Susan, what do you make of this decision on the part of Putin to have this meeting?
Well, it does reflect increasing pressure inside Russian society ever since Putin authorized and required hundreds of thousands of them earlier this fall in response to Ukraine's successes on the battlefield. That has increased the pushback inside Russian society. Hundreds of thousands of people leaving, but those remaining and their families extremely with their children being used as cannon fodder. I remember when we lived there during the second Chechen war, it was the mothers of the soldiers who provided the real emotional power and what existed of resistance inside Russia to that conflict. I think you're going to see the same dynamic here. There's a level of casualties that the Russian government simply can't hide from its own people. So I think it's an unusual step by Putin that reflects the enormous concerns that are growing inside of Russia today when children are being used as cannon.
And there have been more Russian strikes near the largest nuclear plants in Europe. That's where you find CNN Sam Kine.
Good morning,
Just describe the atmosphere and the scene there, Sam, if you can, please.
Well, right now, Becky, a little bit anxious. The air raid sirens are currently going off. I don't know if my microphone can pick them up. They're slightly in the distance. They're by area. This is a big city. But normally, once they go off, there normally are airstrikes. There was a loud detonation this morning. There was an attack on what turned out to be a gas station on the outskirts of town yesterday, and there have been repeatedly attacks close to the Zaporizhzhia power station. That's been going on now for months, because also that location is also, as you know, fire base used by the Russians. But one of the things that's interesting about this whole relentless campaign by Russia now to try to break the power generating capabilities and distribution systems of Ukraine is that it's another example of the Kremlin going after Ukraine's civilian population. Having been knocked back in its attempt to capture Kiev, capture Kharkiv, it switched to bombarding those cities, particularly Kharkiv. You saw, of course, the mass destruction of Mariupol, and now we're seeing this latest effort to try to break the will of the Ukrainian people. It shouldn't come as any surprise. Jens Stoltenberg talked about the Russians weaponizing winter in this campaign. Well, if you're waging a war to try to win it, that is exactly what you would do. What the Ukrainians' response to that is, yes, of course he's doing that. Give us the capability to defend ourselves against these swarms of cruise missiles that the Russians are sending to attack our generating capability, and then we'll be able to not only get through winter, but continue to have military success on the ground. At the moment, there is anti-aircraft capability coming in, but it's not the top-end stuff, not the stuff that's going to give the Ukrainians the strategic or even tactical edge, Becky.
The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, our viewers heard him earlier, fearing the outages could lead to a nuclear accident. It's these sort of warnings that just don't get any more concerning. I mean, you talk about these defense systems that the Ukrainians are intent on getting from the international community and have been asking for months now. What likelihood that those supporting them will actually send what they need at this point?
Well, one of the countries that they've been repeatedly asking for help from is Israel, which has its own issues with Russia related to Russia's role in support of Assad in Syria. The Israelis have been giving moral and other humanitarian support to Ukraine, but are refusing to supply their highly sophisticated anti-missile systems, the Iron Dome and the other bigger systems that we've seen so frequently in action there. So that is something that they are continuing to work on, but the Ukrainians haven't got access yet to the Patriot missiles. Germany and Poland are kind of discussing whether or not they ought to supply them, but they need to negotiate that also with the United States. That would be a very effective anti-missile missile system. There's a lot of equipment out there. What I think the pattern has been so far, and this goes back to 2014 when Ukraine was first invaded by Russia and her proxies, is that the NATO and her allies have been somewhat behind the loop. They've always been anxious about an excessive reaction coming from Moscow, particularly with the use of sophisticated missile systems, and then they eventually catch up. So back in 2014, Ukraine got no lethal aid. Now it's getting tank-killing equipment, it's getting tanks, it's getting armored personnel carriers, it's getting Stinger missiles, it's getting other missiles that can bring down incoming aircraft from Russia, but it's not the top-end stuff yet, Becky.
Sam Kiley is on the ground, Zaporizhzhia in Ukraine. Sam, thank you.
To be a great photographer, there's one thing you need to understand, and that's lighting.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg reiterated NATO's support for Ukraine just this morning.
So NATO will continue to stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. We will not back down.
And the Secretary General Stoltenberg joins us now. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to talk about Hungary first off, saying it will ratify Finland and Sweden's NATO membership bids early next year. As you know, Hungary and Turkey are the only members of the alliance who have not yet cleared this. What's the risk in delaying it until early next year?
So I'm confident that both Hungary and Turkey will ratify the accession protocols for Finland and Sweden. I cannot tell you exactly when, but we all have to remember that all allies, including Turkey and Hungary, made an historic decision in June this year to invite Finland and Sweden to become members of the alliance, and all NATO allies signed the accession protocols. And so far, already 28 out of the 30 members have ratified these protocols in the national parliament.
Descent
so,
checklist.
This is
altimeters
one of the fastest ever accession processes in NATO's history.
Required.
And I'm confident that,
Pressurization.
that also the two
Set.
remaining parliaments
Landing
will
lights.
ratify, so we ensure that Finland
Descent
becomes
checklist
full
complete.
members.
But is there a risk if they wait to ratify it until next year?
We have to understand that Finland and Sweden, they are in a very different place now than before they applied, because after they applied in May, first of all, they are now participating as what we call invitees in NATO's military and civilian activities cooperation. NATO has increased its military presence in the region, in the Baltic region, and several allies, including the United States, have issued security assurances to Finland and Sweden. So it's absolutely inconceivable that if Finland and Sweden were attacked or were put under some kind of pressure, that NATO would not react. So we have come a long way already, and again, this process has so far gone faster or quicker than most other accession processes of these lines.
Germany has offered Poland its Patriot air defense systems. Of course, that came after that missile that was fired, landed in Poland, killed 2 citizens. But Polish officials are saying they actually want Germany to send those defense systems to Ukraine instead. Germany's defense minister says that deployment is something that would have to be agreed to by NATO. Is this something that you think NATO would agree to?
So first of all, you have to remember that NATO allies have already provided significant air defense systems to Ukraine, and we have also increased our presence in the eastern part of the alliance, including in Poland. And I welcome the general effort to strengthen will fit into what we've already done, especially after the invasion in February. We have more troops on the ground, more air and naval assets, and a significant part of that is also different types of air defense systems to make sure that we are there to protect and defend every inch of NATO territory, and by doing so we are also preventing escalation of the conflict beyond Ukraine. Just this week I was in Spain. Spain announced that they will provide more Hawk batteries. NATO allies have provided NASAMS batteries and advanced NATO air defense systems. At the end, it will be a national decision on the specific capabilities, but I continue to call on allies to step up and provide even more air defenses also for Ukraine.
But is it more effective for these defense systems to go to Poland and be there close to the Ukrainian border, or should they go straight to Ukraine in your view?
Also, we need both. We need both increased air defense of our NATO allies in the east, in the Baltic countries, Poland, Romania, but also we need more air defense in Ukraine. That's obvious. We see the horrific attacks every day against civilian infrastructure, against cities in Ukraine, and therefore we need to help Ukraine being able to shoot down those incoming Russian missiles and drones, and that's exactly what we are doing. But we should further step up, and that's my call to NATO allies.
You've obviously seen the latest attacks from Russia continuing to go after essential services in Ukraine. We were talking earlier, they're having to perform heart surgery basically by flashlight in some situations. Do you believe that this is a Russian campaign of terror on Ukrainian civilians?
What we see now is that President Putin is trying to weaponize winter. And by indiscriminate, deliberate attacks on cities, on civilian infrastructure, he tries to deprive the Ukrainians of gas, heating, water, and this just demonstrates once again the brutality of this war and the importance of President Putin, Russia ending this war. The best way we can address the horrific scenes we see from Ukraine is to support Ukraine. And I would like to commend especially the United States for providing unprecedented support to Ukraine, military support, humanitarian support, and also helping to repair the energy grid, the gas infrastructure, in addition to the air defense systems we are providing. And we do that because we stand in solidarity with Ukraine, but also because it is in our own security interest to ensure that President Putin does not win in Ukraine.
Well, and speaking of what the end of this could look like, do you agree with the sentiment that you've heard from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, saying that the idea that it would be possible for Ukraine to completely push Russia out, it would be a very difficult task for the Ukrainians?
The Ukrainians are by far paying the highest price for this war. What we do is measured in money. What they do is measured in blood, lost lives every day. So it has to be up to Ukraine to decide. And we need to remember what this is. This is a war of aggression by Russia against an independent, sovereign, democratic nation in Europe with international recognized borders. NATO and NATO allies are not party to the conflict, but we help Ukraine to defend themselves. The right for self-defense is right enshrined in the UN Charter. Most wars will end at the negotiating table. At the same time, we know that what happens around the negotiating table is dependent on the strength on the battlefield. So if we want Ukraine to prevail as a sovereign independent state, we must provide military support to Ukraine. So when there most likely will be some negotiations at some time, they're able to achieve a result which ensures that they prevail as a democratic state in Europe.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, thank you for your time this morning.
Japan has been hosting World Assembly for Women.
Half of Kyiv is in the dark this morning after Russian strikes knocked power out in much of the country. Bad weather now slowing down repair crews who are racing to restore that power as Ukrainians are now being told to prepare for more blackouts. That means there could be more remarkable scenes like this one. Doctors in Kyiv performing heart surgery basically by flashlight because their hospital had no lights. CNN's Claire Sebastian joins us now. Claire, these images coming out of what life is like for these Ukrainians now as they are dealing with what Russia is doing, what is basically this terror campaign, as you've heard the NATO Secretary General describe it as, they're just remarkable.
Yeah, Caitlin, extraordinary scenes. This came from the head of medical services at the Kyiv Heart Institute. This was a child undergoing emergency open heart surgery. They were only doing emergency operations at this institute, and the operation was already underway when the lights went out. But you can see from those images the doctors kept going. They used their headlamps and they continued with the surgery. They worked through the night, according to the head of medical services, and they did not lose, he said, a single patient. Even more extraordinary is the fact that this was not an isolated incident. I think we can show you another image from another hospital in the city of Heathrow in central southern Ukraine. The head of that hospital said that there was an operation on a 23-year-old man. Also similar scenario, the lights went out, but he said that patient made it. But these are extreme conditions. It just shows that Russia's attacks on the power system is literally creating these life and death scenarios.
And I understand you have some new reporting on the efforts to restore power in the region. What's the latest?
Yeah, Don, so we heard from the electricity transmission operator in Ukraine this morning that they've now restored, they say, 70% of demand for electricity in the country. That's up from 50% yesterday evening, so it shows that they have been working through the night. The nuclear plants, which crucially for the first time in decades were taken offline, off the grid earlier this week by these attacks, are now back online, gradually ramping up their own electricity generation. But those efforts to restore power are being hampered by bad weather, yet another challenge they face. And I wanted to point out these satellite images that we have now on the left. January
Bring the
this
throttles
year,
back
on the
a
right,
bit and slow
November,
to 210
you can see
knots.
that the lights have been taken out across the country. This underscores the challenge that Ukraine now faces. But of course, those scenes from those medical facilities show that they have no choice but to keep trying to restore electricity, even as the risk remains that it's going to get knocked out again.
Can we put those images back up that you just showed there, Claire? This is remarkable. This is what you can see from space. You can see just how bad the blackouts and how severe they are. This is just remarkable to see the side-by-side images of that, of what these Ukrainians are dealing with, what these emergency services are dealing with, and the fact that winter is setting in and they're dealing with this. It's really remarkable.
Yeah, and it's ramping up as well. You know, the attack started on sort of substations, connectors throughout the grid. Now they're attacking the sort of generation capacity itself with these nuclear plants, hydroelectric plants, and all, as you say, as winter really starts to set in, people are dealing with this on a day-to-day basis, having to sort of conserve energy, save water, all of those things. And for regular people as well, they keep doing it even when the water comes back, because of course they feel that it could disappear again at any moment.
Yeah. Claire Sebastian, thank you.
Let's start with
Radar, good
those
evening,
attacks on the energy infrastructure. I mean, speaking to some people heating in the winter is a serious issue. We saw those doctors operating with headlamps there. It's really the attacks on the water system they fear most. Russia has mixed results at best on the battlefield, but these tactics of going at vital infrastructure has been increasingly successful, it seems.
It certainly has, and I think Russia's goal here is to inflict as much misery and pain on the Ukrainian people in terms of attacking their critical infrastructure, electricity, water, telecommunications, to basically break their will. I don't think it's going to work because the Ukrainians know that they don't have the option of surrender if they basically go into a negotiation as a result of these attacks and a handover territory in areas such as the Donbass and Zaporizhia and Kherson. then they're abandoning their people to the brutality of the Russians, which was seen in Bucha. The Ukrainians are fighting for their survival. They can't afford to give up, so they will struggle through this winter and come out the other side and be ready to continue the fight.
In preparation for landing, please make sure your seat backs and tray tables are in the upright and fully locked position.
What about Russia's
EGLL
energy
be making a
blackmail
final
against
pass
Europe?
through the
I mean, will
cabins
that
to pick up
result
any
in
service items, and EGLL
being
be on the
brought
ground
to bear
shortly.
on Ukraine to negotiate?
I think that's the greater concern. Essentially, the Russians are sensing that there's vulnerabilities, there's fractures and fissures in Europe in terms of sustaining support for the Ukrainians, in terms of military assistance to the Ukrainians. I think the Russians are probably also hoping that there will be a fracturing of support in the United States, with the goal, I think, trying to convince
Good evening,
Europe
Connex,
and the United
476
States
flight level
to essentially
380.
talk the Ukrainians
Connex
into an early
476, good morning,
negotiation of a
proceed
ceasefire
to
that
Boston.
would give the Russians then time
Direct
to
Boston,
rebuild
Connex
and
476.
regroup their forces, and also potentially to erode confidence essentially in Ukraine's ability to continue the fight, particularly if, as a result of that pressure, the supply of military capabilities to Ukraine drops off.
Control,
So I think there has to be a strong pushback
Hotel,
against
request
that Russian
right,
effort to
heading
blackmail Europe
310
and to coerce
initially,
Europe
to avoid
into
weather.
ending support for Ukraine.
Yeah, we've already seen some weakening of support, at least here in the U.S., from certain segments of the Republican Party. So looking ahead then at the battlefield situation,
Control, the
we
morning,
hear that things will come to a halt during the winter, but you seem to think so. Why not?
Look, I think, you know, when you look at history of warfare, there's many examples of battles that continue right through the harshest. One example was the Battle of the Bulge in 1944. So I think that you will see the war continue throughout this winter. The Ukrainians know that they cannot let up the pressure on the Russians. The Russians will continue to reinforce their defensive positions in Kherson and in Donbass, and both sides are preparing themselves for a return to full intensity operations in the northern spring and the summer. So it may slow down a little bit, but I don't see it necessarily coming to a
flight level 380 to
Before we go, to keep waging that war, Russia is running out of military hardware, but getting vital equipment from Iran, and not just the drones that we've been talking so much about. What impact do you think that will have in Russia's ability to keep trying to wear Ukraine down?
Look, I think it could be decisive if the Iranians provide the Russians with more advanced strike capabilities in the form of surface-to-surface ballistic missiles, such as the Fateh 110 and the Zolkafar, that have a much greater precision and much more difficult for the Ukrainians to intercept because of the sheer speed of the missile. Then the Russians can suddenly open up and widen their campaign against Ukrainian critical infrastructure, as well as Ukrainian military infrastructure, airbase ports, command and control centers, that sort of thing. And so the provision of those Iranian missiles, as opposed to the drones, I think could be quite significant. So what you would then see is Ukraine quite rightly asking for greater protection from those Iranian missiles, and that could be involved, could involve the provision of more advanced ballistic missile defense capabilities from the West.
Always appreciate your analysis, Malcolm Davis. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Get the credit card that rewards you with dynamic interest rates that you control when you manage your money well.
Anastasia Shevchenko is a Russian activist who spent 2 years under house arrest for speaking out against the government. In those 2 years, she had to deal with something no parent had to face, her daughter passing away. And house arrest kept her from being on her daughter's side in those last years.
Reduce thrust and begin descending towards the runway. Lower the landing gear and lower full flaps as we slow down. Adjust thrust to maintain our final approach speed. Flight attendants, please be seated for landing.
125, 980, Charlie. 94 call from you.
Thomas Cook 129er, 135, 510 goodbye.
5510, Thomas Cook 129. Control, Thomas Kate Sierra Hotel, may we deviate 5 to 10 degrees further to the right?
Yeah, no problem, sir.
Thank you.
Overspeed.
Your trans 46 uniform 135510.
Australia 135510, your trans 46 uniform. Good night.
Hello, Channel 516, heading 330 degrees due weather.
Coming 516, hello, identified Russian.
Easy 6948, request 10 degrees left.
Overspeed.
Channel 29 Mike Zulu, flight level 380, and we are approaching Mapple.
Sonic 89 Mike Zulu, identified directed Godos and any turnips.
Direct Godos, we're probably going to be looking to go right almost 30 degrees for weather.
Yeah, no problem at all.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, aircraft 120, flight level 28, approaching level 280 to Aberdeen.
Your trans 120 identified, what's your requested level?
We can stay at 280, aircraft 120.
Okay then.
Slot 3931, direct to Denko.
Denko 3921.
Slot 3981, direct Badu.
Direct Badu, slot 3981.
Whiskey Hotel Victor now descending for the final approach.
Slot 7 Alpha Kilo, contact radar 130.625, do usłyszenia.
3065, slot 7 Alpha Kilo, good day.
Slot 3931, contact radar 134.875, cześć.
134.875, slot 21, thank you.
Slot 3903, direct Kukam.
Tu Kukam, dziękujemy, 3903.
Line 60 Whiskey, contact radar 134.875.
Sigan B960
Lot 223, direct Navur.
Navur, direct lot 223.
Lot 460, expect 59 at mark.
Copy.
Approach slot 7 Whiskey Lima, kłaniamy się after departure 2200.
Dzień dobry, lot 7 Whiskey Lima, approach, radar contact, climb flight level 230.
Climb flight level 230, lot 7 Whiskey Lima.
Slot 223, contact radar 130.875, do usłyszenia.
130.875, dziękuję, go.
Whiskey Hotel Victor now turning at 3 miles to the extended runway 027. We're at 3,000 feet and descending.
Chile 1 Hotel Foxtrot, descend 4,000.
Yeah, 4,000 feet, 1 Hotel Foxtrot.
$2,500.
KLM 50 Golf, contact departure, have a nice day. Departure, KLM 50 Golf, you 2 bye. Thank you.
Whiskey Hotel Victor now on extended long final. 200 knots at 2,000 feet.
Just 197, contact Apron 1 front estimate 55. Up to 1855, please, 197. Nana Golf Tower, put the mortgage on company same side, line up and wait on the church behind.
Then company, line up runway 28 behind, that's 9 Golf.
Swiss 819 at Tower, hello again, and taxi to Juliet, cross runway 28.
Landing gear.
Nothing to in the
Down.
Swiss 819.
Flaps. Set. Landing lights. On. Speed brakes. Arm end.
Overspeed.
Before landing checklist completed.
Overspeed. 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 Overspeed.
1,000. $500. 400. 300. 200. 100, 60, 40, 30, 20, retard, 5.
I think you can do better than that. After landing checklist. Spoilers. Disarm end. Flaps. Retract. Landing lights. Off.
Delta 258,
Taxi
right
lights.
heading 150.
On. After landing checklist.
150, heading down 68.
American 9702, turn left heading 085, full base.
085 heading, American 9702.
Okay, taxi to the terminal. Set the parking brake, turn off the fasten seatbelt sign, and shut down engines. Nice flying.
Delta 258, you have about 8.5 miles to go. Coming to tower 19.23.
1922, go 58, flat.
Right.
Neutron 5 for Charlie Alpha, you can stay on this taxi Yankee to Bravo 35. Yankee to Bravo 35, Neutron 5 for Charlie Alpha. Front 99 Papa Kilo, first left and cross at Yankee 2.
First left request Yankee 2, first 9 Papa Kilo.
77 go, first left, cross Yankee 2. 77 go, first left, cross Yankee 2.
First left, cross Yankee 2, 77 go.
EC5 for Whiskey Golf, connect ground, 121.905.
121.905, EC5 for Whiskey Golf.
For the 719, you can stay on this, taxi Yankee Fox 4.
Yankee for Fox 4, Kellen 719 again.
Front 99 Papa Kilo, contact 121.905.
11905, reference 9 Papa Kilo 1.
Just time for Charlie Alpha, first left, cross Yankee 2.
First left to cross Yankee 2, not front, 5 for Charlie Alpha.
The 73 Golf, you can stay on this by Yankee to Bravo 27.
Yankee, Bravo 27 with you, it's 20 go.
.77 Golf, 11905, do it.
11905, do it, 77 Golf.
You're on 20 Hotel, 11905, do it.
11905, bye, 20 Hotel.
You're on 719, first left and cross at Yankee 2.
First left, cross Yankee 2, okay, then 719.
Lieutenant Juliet, stay on this Yankee Delta 54.
Yankee Delta 54 to have Lieutenant Juliet.
And the 70 Golf, just confirm the taxi clearance.
Via Yankee to Bravo 27, cross at Yankee 2.
Yankee and we cross at Yankee 2, the bit north of 118, right?
Yeah, correct, it's first left now. Got 186, you can stay on this Yankee to Delta 47.
Say Yankee Delta 47, okay, 184.
Neutron 5 for Charlie Alpha, contact ground 121.905.
121.905, have a good day, Neutron 5.